So Escape from the Lab Part 2. This is another thing that escaped from an HP engineering lab, calculator related. This one, because I know somebody will bring up the question, this one comes from a source who prefers to be anonymous. And it is this funny looking box that has a whole lot of dip switches on the front and a couple more of these champ connectors. It has an LCD power indicator that I believe is just a single on or off indicator. Odd that one would use an LCD for that.
I can give you a guess right now.
Okay.
Emulator.
Well, of course it's an emulator, but...
Okay. Because we used one for the 41, the HP shipped it to us to, we did the ROM.
Yeah, probably didn't look quite like this though. So here's a closer view, and you can see that there's a lot of dip switches. There's 4 banks of dip switches that are all labeled the same. There's another bank of switches over here that has a different label, and yet more. And one of the key things to notice here is that this is seg and nib, which is presumably segment and nibble, and the nibble gives us a hint because the HP nibble-oriented calculators were based on a Saturn processor, which originated with HP71B. And sure enough, down here, these connectors are labeled Saturn bus, in and out. So this is clearly an emulator for something Saturn-related.
Well, that covers a lot of machines.
And here's just some views of the box from different things. They've got a nice carrying handle on one end of the box. The internal card guides are, you can see, so when we looked at the front view, it has 5 positions for 5 boards. This particular unit only has 3 installed. But if we look at the side, there are clearly card guides for 6 boards. And so looking back at the front again, that suggests to us that there's another board that is related to, a single board that's just related to the general function of the box. And here's the top off, and we can see the top of the emulation boards. And I'll go one more slide. Here's a direct top view. And key thing here is this is RAM. It is 8 chips that are each 8K by 8 static RAMs. They happen to be NMOS rather than CMOS, so this is not especially low power. There's actually another RAM up here that I don't know what it does. You can see the dip switches that are visible through the slots in the front, but you'll also see that there are more dip switches inside here and even 2 more there. There's a switch accessible from the front here, a push button. And here is, the board has edge connectors that you see sticking down into one of these gray connectors, that the gray connectors form the back plane. They are a ribbon cable IDC connector. And so the rest of the chips on this board are CMOS and or TTL logic chips, just general logic, same thing up here. So what this board does, it is a Saturn memory emulator. It has 4 separate banks. We talked about the 4 sets of dip switches that are labeled alike, and those set a base address for a bank of memory and whether that bank is write protected. And so each bank has 2 of these chips, and I believe that's because an individual bank is 16K nibbles. And so 32K, well, I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly how many nibbles, but the fact is it's 4 banks, and so in the entire unit that has 3 of those boards in this particular one, that's 12 banks of memory. If it had 5 boards, we would obviously be able to have 20 banks of memory. And so Saturn bus, most of you may know, most of the devices that plug into it on, for instance, an HP71B are soft addressed. And this is like plug and play on a PC, that the Saturn bus, there's an ID command that firmware can send out to find out what is the first device on a chain, and that device will respond and say, I'm a RAM or I'm a ROM, and how big I am. And software will say, okay, well then it'll send a config command that tells it, okay, this is your base address. And that also then enables the next device on the chain to respond with its ID. In this case, all the banks of memory that are in here are hard addressed. And the the labels here, you see the first one is ROM. That's basically whether it's ROM or RAM. The second one, HRD, that's hard configured or not. And then 19 through 15 are the top 5 bits of the actual Saturn memory address. So this does not emulate soft configured ROMs that you would plug into a 71B. And since it only emulates hard configured memory, I'm not sure what happens if you turn that hard switch off, but I've looked at the circuit board, and there's not enough circuitry to do the soft addressing, so I'm pretty sure it does not. But this would have been used to emulate either the base ROM in a calculator. For instance, all of the Pioneer calculators that use Saturn, they did not use soft addressing at all. The ROMs in those were just hard addressed from 0 to whatever the highest address that the firmware ROM used. Similarly, in the 71B, the operating system ROM that started at 0 was all hard addressed, and the other example of hard addressed was the 4th assembler ROM that had hard addressed memory for the majority of the 4th. So this box probably was used for development of Pioneer calculators. It might have been early enough that it might have been used for some of the development on the 71B, but that is less clear, and I'm guessing probably not. So,
I think fairly heavy, so that's a big handle there.
Yeah, and so this is the board in the bottom of the box. You see it has batteries, so that could keep the memory alive for some amount of time. Probably was rechargeable. It actually uses, the power connector is actually for an 82059B charger or equivalent, which, you know, there were European equivalents of that. But the common charger that was used with the rechargeable pack for the 41, it was used by the 91, 92, 97. It was used by the 9114 disk drive. So it was just a common thing they had. There's some other circuitry here that is essentially the basic support. I haven't studied it closely, but this backplane may or may not have had, it may have been all wired in parallel, or they might have had one signal that was not parallel, that was a daisy chain. It's unclear, but this board routes the Saturn bus in and out, also over here to this backplane for the emulator boards. So that is basically it, but it was just a couple of internal HP products, or not products, but test fixtures or whatever you want to call them, that were never intended to ship to customers and escaped from the lab. Any questions on that?
Is that presentation on the drive?
It is not, because my presentations, because John and I there'll be part 3, but it does not involve stuff from out of HP, but John Doran and I will be presenting part 3, and we were working so hard and such long hours leading up to the conference to try to have something ready that I only got these slides thrown together hastily on Friday night. So they're not.
Can you email them to Eric?
I will. Yes. They
like mine.
I will mail them to Eric, and they will be available. Any other questions? Yes.
You probably figured this out, but we'd probably get a clue what it was for just by the date codes on all those ICs.
Yeah. Well, it almost certainly wasn't for anything later than the Pioneer calculators, because that was really the last of actual Saturn use. I suppose technically the last was probably the 48G and GX, but this was not likely to have been used in the development of those. So this was almost certainly developed and used for the Pioneer calculators. So that maybe as early as the 18C, which is not considered Pioneer, it's clamshell, but basically things of that era. So calculators introduced between 1986 and 1991 or thereabouts.
Could have been used could have been for RPL development, core RPL.
Well, as I said, it might have been, but I think they probably had different, on the basis of things like date codes and so forth, I suspect that they probably had a different emulator that was used that early on, but I don't know. If we ever had occasion to talk to any of the people that worked on the 71B or the 28, it's certainly something that could be asked. We could show them the photos and say, did you use this?
That's a long time ago, you know?
It is. So, but I have not tried to further dig into the provenance.
Now you find out what it is, then what do you do with it?
Well,
You might try to use it?
this one I would like to actually do the reverse engineering far enough to actually bring it up and verify that it's functional, probably by connecting it to a 71B and configuring one of those emulator boards into the hard addressed ROM area that in the 71B memory map starts at E0000 hexadecimal. And for instance, I could test it by trying to actually load the hard addressed part of the fourth assembler ROM into it. But I have not done any of that yet. And just going by the let's see. Going by the number of chips on the circuit board, it's going to take some amount of effort to actually trace that out. I mean, I don't necessarily need to derive an entire schematic for it, but what I definitely would need to know in order to use it is the pinout of these Saturn bus connectors, and that'll
even if you can get some clues by the setting of the dip switches, but you have no idea.
Well, yeah, and you should be able to see if you look very closely at these dip switches, they were addressed to consecutive into a consecutive range of memory. So that range did not start from 0, although it may have with the additional boards. This unit may well have been configured with all 5 boards originally, or maybe it wasn't. And the fact that it has a daisy chain out meant that if you needed more memory than 5 boards could handle, then you might have chained a second one of these boxes on. Yes?
That board with all the memory chips on it, on the other side, is that wire wrapped or is
the memory chips are these.
Yeah, so on the other side of that board, how'd they? Oh, it's all laid out. I thought it was
You were
prototype.
thinking of the other.
I actually brought one of these boards and I intended to bring it over this morning, and well, it might be in my backpack, so if anybody wants to look at it, I'll see if it's actually in my backpack. I might have left it at the hotel, I'm not sure. So
This is not your primary presentation.
this is not. So part 3 is what John and I have been working on. So is the food ready? Okay. Thank you.